call to order this Bloomington Common Council special session meeting of Monday, the 16th of September, 2019. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Granger,
Present.
Rollo,
Present.
Volan,
Here.
Sandberg, Ruff,
Here.
Piedmont Smith,
Here.
Sturbaum.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Sims, I'm sorry. Present. Yes.
Very good. Thank you. Here's the agenda summation. We will have previously considered legislation this evening. The first item that we will have is a declaration of appearance of conflict of interest by Councilmember Sims. That will be followed by a motion to structure deliberations this evening. Then we will have a motion to suspend the rules to reopen consideration of ordinance 1912. We'll then have a motion to return council consideration of ordinance 1912 to a motion to adopt. And then we will have a hearing on ordinance 1912, which is to amend the city of Bloomington zoning maps by rezoning 3.5 acres of property from commercial arterial CA to plan unit development, and to approve a district ordinance and preliminary plan regarding 1800 North Walnut Street CDG Acquisitions LLC petition. And that received a common council regular session action of the 4th of September 2019, motion to adopt. It was rejected 351. It had a land use recommendation report of DUPAS 013, and it had a regular session action of July 31st, 2019, where it was referred to Land Use Committee for report on the 4th of September 2019, adopted 700. And then we will attend to council schedule before we adjourn this evening. So with that, do we have a declaration of appearance of conflict of interest by Councilmember Sims? Would you like to proceed?
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. As some of you may know, my wife serves as the department head for the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department. Ordinance 19-12 includes a financial contribution to the Housing Development Fund, which is administered by the HAN Department. By voting on this budget, I would be voting in part on the funds for budget overseen by my spouse. However, the size of the Affordable Housing Fund has no relation to the level of compensation for her as a department head. There is a provision in local code which applies when a council member is required to take action on a matter where he or she has a financial interest which is more than minimal or different from that shared by the general public. In that event, the council member must explain the potential conflict and either A, ask that he or she be excused from voting, deliberating, or taking action on the matter, or state why he or she is able to participate fairly, objectively, and in the public interest despite the potential conflict. In this case, I wish to declare that potential conflict and state that my support for affordable housing is independent of where this contribution would be implemented. This is a significant contribution towards a pressing need in our community. For that reason, I will be able to participate fairly, objectively, and in the public interest despite the potential conflict. Respectfully, Councilmember Sims.
Thank you, Councilmember Sims. Do we need a roll call vote on this?
No.
No.
All in favor of accepting the declaration? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, that is accepted.
Thank you.
Councilmember Volan, would you like to introduce the motion on the structured debate?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question first, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, are you suggesting that I explain all potential motions in the motion, or do I simply make the first motion?
The first thing I think you might want to consider doing is structuring your deliberations. So that's if you want to do that, there's a motion in that regard.
I'm ready
and
to
then
do
next
that,
up
yeah.
is the motion to suspend the rules.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move that the council structure deliberations under this section of the agenda in the following manner. First, the council will entertain a motion to suspend the rules to reopen consideration of ordinance 1912. If the motion passes, then the council will entertain a motion to return council consideration of ordinance 1912 to a motion to adopt. If that motion passes, then the council will request excuse me, that the clerk introduce the item by reading the ordinance by title and synopsis, and then entertain a motion to adopt ordinance 1912. I need a second.
Second.
Does this require a roll call vote?
Well,
Mr. Sherman?
this structuring of motions can be discussed.
Oh, yes.
So
And it's
even-
subject, you'll need a two-thirds majority, so generally that's a roll call vote, but
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Are there questions or,
If I can just say, the motion to suspend requires a two-thirds vote and is not subject to debate or amendment. The motion, if that motion succeeds, then the motion to return consideration of ordinance 1912 is debatable, but is not amendable. And then if the motion passes, then it's as if we're reintroducing it for the first time. That's all I wanted to say. I'm happy to answer questions.
are there questions from council regarding the motion? Is there public comment on the motion? Yes.
There's no debate or amendment on the motion to suspend.
Is there public comment on this motion?
this, as written, this allows for public comment on the motion to suspend the rules. And I think it says 3 minutes, and
I should maybe add to the motion that, yes, that we would limit public comment on the motion to suspend to 3 minutes per person. We would limit members and members of the public and council comments speaking and asking questions on the motion to return to consideration to 3 minutes each. And then members of the public may speak for no more than 5 minutes on the reintroduction of the ordinance if those two motions pass.
Thank you. My question was, is there public comment on the motion to structure debate?
To suspend the rules.
No,
No.
okay. All right, will the clerk please call the roll on the motion to structure debate?
No, that's out of order. So this motion is for the whole thing, and it's structured so that the public can comment on the structure of deliberations tonight. So public comment is in order now, but it will not be in order, oh, sorry, I take it back. You're
No,
right.
no, what we're voting on is structuring debate
Yeah.
at this point. Correct, Mr. Sherman.
You're right.
Will the clerk please call the roll on the motion to structure debate as described by Councilmember Bowles?
Councilmember Granger,
Yes.
Rallo,
Yes.
Bolin,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Ruff,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Sturbaugh,
Yes.
Sims.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion to structure debate is adopted 8-0.
Mr. President, I move that the council entertain a motion to suspend the rules to reopen consideration of ordinance 1912.
Second.
All right, and this is,
Not subject to
Not
debate or
subject
amendment,
to
requires a
debate.
two-thirds vote.
all right, but it's open to question. If
There-
council members have questions, direct them to Mr. Sherman.
in order to make sure council members understand the motion, they can ask points of information, and I believe this part of the agenda does open up public comment
Yeah.
for 3 minutes.
Let's go to council
One-
questions first.
One time per speaker.
Do any council members have questions regarding the motion? Seeing none, we'll open up to the public. If the public would like to comment on the motion to suspend the rules to reopen consideration of ordinance 1912, please step to the microphone. Okay, well, seeing none, then we're back to council, and we have no room for debate, so we will now,
Call the question.
Well, what if we want to talk about our vote or something?
It's not debatable, but it's, you
It's not
can ask questions.
debatable, I'm not talking about debating, just saying, I'd like to be able to explain how I intend to vote.
That's debate.
I think that'll come with.
Is that debate or is that comment?
Same
It's
thing.
the same, it's part of the deliberations. This motion is designed to just get down to the vote. We've extended it to allow for public comment. We don't have any. If you have a question about what's the implication of your vote, this is a good time to ask it. But this is not a vote where council members comment on their positions.
So I have a question.
Please.
So this vote on this particular
motion should be seen as, correct, true or false, should be seen as completely distinct from our position about the actual agenda item. In other words, one could vote out of respect for, one could be in disagreement with all aspects of this, but out of respect for the will of the majority of council, respecting the body as a whole, a council member might say, I will vote yes on this.
That's fair. Your considerations on each of these motions could be different. One of the key differences is that this motion requires 6 council members, and other votes tonight will require 5.
Okay. Any other questions? We have a motion and second. Will the clerk please call the roll on the motion to suspend the rules?
Councilmember Rallo,
Yes.
Volin,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Ruff,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Sturbaum,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Granger.
Yes.
We needed 6 votes and we have 8 votes to suspend the rules.
Mr. Chair, I move to return council consideration of ordinance 1912 to a motion to adopt.
Second.
And this is,
So this is
Debatable.
this is debatable.
mhm.
We need to, because we already entertained the ordinance, we need to bring it back, but it requires a simple majority. It is debatable, but it cannot be amended.
Okay, then I'll go to council members for question or comment on the motion to return council consideration of ordinance 1912. All right, seeing none, then we'll go to the public. Does the public have comments on the motion to return council consideration of ordinance 1912 to motion of adopt? Please step to the microphone. Seeing none, we're back to council. And we have a motion and second. Will the clerk?
Well,
Is there a comment? Is comments allowed?
Comments allowed? Okay. Councilmember Ruff?
I just want to make absolutely certain I understand what we're about to vote on with this vote.
Do you want an answer?
Yeah, I'd like to answer.
Sure.
Sorry, I
Up
didn't.
till now, everything's been a prelude to this vote. This is where, up until now, your vote to reject this PUD as of, on September 4th is in effect. With adoption of this vote, that action was erased, and you're starting at the point where you can move to adopt the ordinance. The significance here is that it will take 5 votes, either in favor or against, for the council to have a say on this PUD after this vote. If you do not have 5-vote majority one way or the other, then the vote of the Plan Commission in June would go into effect. So this is, that's key for this vote and how that changes your posture as a council.
So can I follow up with a question?
Please.
So if the council votes 4 yes and 4 no and 1 abstain, then the council's decision for December 4th is not what's in effect. What's in effect is the Plan Commission's decision.
After this vote. Okay.
Okay, so
If this vote passes, then you are correct.
but if this vote fails, then the meeting's over and what the council did on the 4th is in effect?
That's correct. You've suspended the rules to allow for this motion. This motion would then erase your action from September 4th. So, and then you'll be able to take whatever action you see fit if that motion passes. But it will take 5 to have significance.
Parliamentarian, do you have a question or a comment?
I'm not speaking as a parliamentarian, I'm speaking as someone who's making these motions. Well, I mean, technically I do that as parliamentarian, but in this case, I'm initiating the action. What I want to say is I recognize the peril, as you might say, of accepting this motion where we undo the previous decision, only to then not make changes, and that if a majority of council doesn't want to see the changes, then it's approved as decided by the Plan Commission. My action at that point, I would be willing to withdraw the ordinance. Am I not able to withdraw it from consideration?
And
To
at
move to
that
withdraw?
point, we're still, once you get beyond this point,
Right.
the only way you have a say beyond what the Plan Commission recommended is a yes or a no. So you either say, 5 people say yes for the ordinance as amended, or
As amended.
Yeah, or 5 say no.
Then I would say this: if we do, it's my personal stance that if we do not adopt the amendment, I will vote no. And I believe that that would be enough to make sure that the project is not approved at all. It's defeated once again. I wanted to see these changes made, and if the changes aren't made, then I would have a problem with it. So I hope that helps, Mr. Ruff.
Does that satisfy your question, Councilmember Ruff?
Yeah.
Other questions from council? Okay, I think we're ready to
Call the question?
have a roll call.
Well, what about final comments? Councilman? We had questions a minute ago.
Questions or comments?
Comments.
About the motion to return council consideration of ordinance 1912 to a motion to adopt, to undo the previous decision.
Maybe I
Councilmember Granger?
have I didn't approve this project last week. I don't approve it this week, but I'm really concerned that it may revert to the initial plan. I mean, I think the developers have worked really hard to try to make changes. For me, it's not enough. So, wow. So, period.
Thank you. Other comment from council? Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, I think it's very important for me, if I vote yes on this, that the next motion is one to append reasonable conditions to the PUD proposal, which reflect the conversations that we've had with the developers over the last 2 weeks. So I would respectfully ask my colleagues, if this vote is positive, to allow somebody to make a motion to append those reasonable conditions before we vote on the final motion again.
We can do that.
Before we vote on the ordinance again.
Yes.
Right.
Once it's introduced, you may have that opportunity. Councilmember Varoff, do you have a
Yeah,
comment?
I'm uncomfortable with this gamesmanship I feel like is almost going on here. I don't know what's gonna happen in the course of this discussion, and there is a chance that it could be rejected and revert back. I mean, I don't know what's gonna happen. So I'm gonna vote no at this point.
Councilmember Sturbaum, I believe. is
Yeah,
next.
we were at a point in our last council meeting where I suggested that we continue so that we could get some more concessions from the petitioner. I have since understood that those concessions could be amended to this new approval, and those included a facade improvement of adding a considerable brick to the facade that faces the street. There's a bus route at stake that would serve the community, and there's contribution equal to the annual council sidewalk committee to do off-site sidewalk work. These were the ideas that I was wanting to have discussed at our last meeting when the question was called and the vote came out in a negative, and it just felt very abrupt, and it felt like deliberation was cut off. And I would like this to be reopened for that reason, that we can make this a better project.
Thank you, Councilmember Volin.
I acknowledge the complexity of what we're doing here, but I want to point to the complexity of the vote on September 4th, which was unprecedented in my experience on council. There were a great deal of questions as to what motion took precedence, and in a moment when that made a difference. There was a lot of information to process that not every member could process. In the moment, again, I voted no because I did not want the motion in the first place, and I knew, the only thing I knew in that moment was if I vote with the majority, then I'll be able to reopen the question. And I did ask to have it reconsidered. But again, when we were reconsidering the motion that night, it wasn't clear enough to Mr. Sherman, myself, or anybody else in the room what would have been the appropriate actions to take. It took us an hour of debate after that meeting, debate pretty much all the next day, to figure out what happened and how it should have happened. And I believe that what we're doing tonight is deciding it properly. Councilmember Sturbaum and I both had the same feeling that we weren't sure, we wanted more time to consider it, specifically to get the details right, to get them in writing. The petitioners put a lot of things in writing, and this is why we were so ambivalent, because they were close, but it wasn't quite there. Like I said earlier, it's important to note that I do not support the project as it came out of Plan Commission. I'm only reopening it because of what Councilmember Sturbaum and I are trying to do, is to get these specifics down. So, I just want you to all understand that this motion simply undoes the defeat of Ordinance 1912. After it's undone, we reintroduce it as it were any other new piece of legislation, without, of course, the elaborate presentation which we have all are familiar with. So we have to go through this step, and while I recognize people are uncomfortable with it, I am quite confident that the will is here to defeat the motion, to defeat the ordinance once again, if the amendment is not accepted. Thank you.
Councilmember Sims.
I guess what I'm wondering, at the last meeting, the petitioner, and we talked about several things, bus route, sidewalk. I'm hearing now about the facade being less concrete and more brick, and I'm assuming that's been accepted. I'm just wondering what else, what other concessions are we asking? I'm just thinking out loud. I know I may be out of order because it's a comment instead of a question and all that, but I think this is important.
I think I have a question for our council attorney. Is this appropriate to discuss these matters?
It's debatable to the extent that the underlying question is debatable. So yes, you can, it's a point of information. What's at stake here? So I'll defer to Councilmember Volin, who constructed the reasonable condition. It's not being introduced at this time. It's merely being, it's informing the council about how this project has changed, and to let you vote with knowledge.
If I may.
Councilmember Volin.
The project has not changed until this amendment is adopted. The amendment was prepared so that it could be changed. The only reason that I'm supportive of this project is if this amendment is adopted. So the amendment was sent out in the packet on Friday. We all should have a copy of it. It is mostly the same as what the petitioners were offering on September 4th. It adds a few new items. I expected, and I still expect, that whatever discussion we have tonight will be on the items on the tail end of basically the exceptions or the changes to what the petitioner offered on September 4th. I would strongly urge you to look now at the amendment and see those are the items that we're going to discuss. And of course, the amendment The reasonable conditions list is open to amendment. Anyone who, in fact, there's a couple of changes that I need to propose to the amendment, a couple of word changes that will better clarify it. I already know of two, and I expect that other members will have, will want to strike or add a word or two or strike a line. So we're gonna go, it's like any ordinance that's being amended, it's the same process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sims. Does that satisfy your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right. For any further questions or comments?
Call the question?
Second.
Will the clerk please call the roll on motion to return council consideration of ordinance 1912 to a motion to adopt?
Councilmember Volin,
Yes.
Sandberg,
Yes.
Ruff,
No.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Sturbaum,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Granger,
Yes.
Rollo.
Yes.
7-1.
7-1. That motion is adopted.
Mr. President, I move that the ordinance 1912 be introduced and read by title and synopsis only.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that ordinance 1912 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Will the clerk please read?
Ordinance 1912 to amend the City of Bloomington zoning maps by rezoning 3.85 acres of property from commercial arterial, CA, to planned unit development, and to approve a district ordinance and preliminary plan regarding 1800 North Walnut Street, CDG Acquisitions LLC petitioner. The synopsis reads as follows. Ordinance 1912 would rezone 3.85 acres of commercial arterial, CA, to planned unit development, PUD, and approve the associated district ordinance and preliminary plan to allow the construction of a mixed-use development.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I move that ordinance 1912 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. We have members of the administration here this evening. We have the Planning and Transportation Director, Terry Porter. We have Deputy Mayor. We have Corporate Counsel. We have, I believe, Mayor Hamilton is here. And so if there are any questions, I don't think that they prepared to make any presentation. We're familiar with the project. And so I suggest that we begin with any council questions or a motion, if anyone would like to make a motion to amend the ordinance.
Mr. President, I move reasonable condition 1 to ordinance 1912.
Second.
Okay, would you describe it?
Okay, so on September 4th, the petitioner had a number of revisions. In fact, I count 11 bullet points in their proposed revisions to the ordinance. They talked about the access drive and parking in front being eliminated and the building being moved to the west to create more of a building forward street front. All commercial parking will be in the garage. They created additional modulation along the frontage. They created a large outdoor plaza, 2 pedestrian access points from the public sidewalk to the plaza. The easternmost portion of the building shifted further north to create a greater setback on the south side. They removed an entire floor of the east building, which reduced, I think, 72 beds out of 822 proposed. They proposed to add 50 solar panels, 20 kilowatts of power, 2,000 square foot green roof. And they also proposed they agreed to preliminary terms for a public shuttle bus service. And finally, they agreed to additional brick throughout the project. These are details that were handed out then. The extra details that are proposed in this reasonable condition form is to adopt what they've already proposed and to commit to 5 other items. Number 1, to offer parking on-site parking only a la carte and not include the parking spaces in rent. To commit to an amount not to exceed $300,000 to complete the sidewalk network from the project down Walnut Street to 19th Street and all the way to Dunn. They are committing specifically to funding a Bloomington transit bus, not simply a shuttle bus, but a regular Bloomington transit route that would be at least 5 miles long, that would run a bus every 30 minutes during the IU academic school year, 12 hours a day, Monday through Thursday, 10 hours a day on Fridays. They would commit, in addition to the additional brick already committed to on the west facade, to additional brick directly above the sign marked Seward Foundry. You can see it in this illustration on the screen here. It is sorry, Sandberg, I told me to get in front of you here. Yes, it is the corner that is closest to the viewer's perspective here. It's hard to read, but basically that corner that's most prominent and faces us was not brick and now is brick all the way up, both on the west and the south faces.
And all the dark is brick.
Yeah,
that you're
and,
seeing.
right, and there was also, they had committed to brick on the, more brick on this facade that Mr. Searle can, I think, go into better detail about. And finally, to commit to a maximum ratio of 0.556 structured parking spaces per bedroom. This last one was based on the original parking formula. It was 457 spaces on 822 beds, or 0.556 per bedroom. With the reduction in rooms, the 0.556 remains, it goes down to about 40 spaces to 417. I'm happy to answer questions about it, but I think that this is a pretty thorough explanation of the specific changes that at least 2 members here wanted to see before being able to say that this project should be passed. I'm happy to answer questions.
Point of information, I may have missed it, but did you mention how this reasonable condition was revised as a result of today?
There was a revision. The word maximum was not in the ratio. It just said commit to a ratio of 0.556, and I intended it to be maximum. If they want to build less parking, they can. And the other thing was that should be in there, the third bullet point, it should specify that the bus route will be open to the public and is not restricted to residents of the complex. On the other hand, by definition, a Bloomington Transit bus route must be open to the public, so I'm not sure we need to change the words on that. By definition, if they fund a Bloomington Transit route, it will be open to everyone.
Before I go to questions, I'd like to give the opportunity to representatives of the petitioner, if you would like to say anything, or regarding this is reasonable conditions 1, as described by Councilmember Boland.
Brant Stiles, Collegiate Development Group, 7711 Bonham Avenue, St. Louis, Missouri. Members of City Council, first off, I truly appreciate the opportunity tonight to reconsider what was put in front of you. I don't really need to rehash the project. I think everyone's very familiar, but did want to just explain one quick item just about our company. And we really, pride ourselves on developing quality projects. And to ensure this, we really limit the amount of projects that we deliver on an annual basis, 2 to 3 projects. It allows me as a principal and my other partner to stay very, very involved in these projects to make sure that we deliver on all the promises that we make. And all the promises that we make are very, very important to us. Make sure we deliver a high quality project and make sure this is a great project for the community. So we've spent the last over a year putting our blood, sweat, and tears into this project, and really appreciate the reconsideration. Over the last few days, we've been working with a couple council members to try to address some of the items that were identified at the last meeting. I appreciate the opportunity to go through those exercises. Something that we were very happy to deliver at that time, and I'm glad we are given the opportunity for the consideration. So a couple of the items that were identified in those conversations were more brick, and I brought a slide to identify those, some of the conditions. Previously, right around here, and here, it was surrounded. There was brick, but it was also the 3rd or 4th floor. The materials were cementitious panel. And in the modifications, we took that entire volume and it's now identified with brick. In addition, this area right here was previously cementitious panel, which is now brick. couple of the other conditions, the sidewalk on 19th and reduced parking stalls on an a la carte basis. This is a updated elevation based on the additional brick on the facades that we identified, the view from the north. And this is a study of the sidewalk network along 19th. And what we've identified is that we will have the ability to make the connection along all of 19th Street and are committed to doing that. That's all I wanted to share. You know, this is a very important project to our organization, and excited to hopefully be a member of the community if this is voted in favor tonight. So I appreciate the reconsideration.
Thank you for your statement. We'll now go to questions from council, and Councilmember Piedmont Smith, would you like to begin?
So do I understand correctly that you would not only fill in the sidewalk between the property south along Walnut Street to 19th, but also all of the gaps in the sidewalk on 19th Street from Walnut to Dunn?
That is correct.
Further questions, Councilmember Volin?
To follow up on that question, the one thing I didn't know looking at the Google Maps is what if you can't acquire right-of-way, or if there is, I mean, will you be able to build the sidewalk, or are there sort of unexpected third-party problems with getting it across?
In reviewing,
119.
in reviewing over the GIS map, which provides a fairly accurate depiction of the properties and the right-of-way, it appears that there is room in the right-of-way outside of the property lines to construct the sidewalks. If through surveys and other further identification we are unable to do it within the right-of-way, we will engage in conversations with the landowners. We've committed up to $300,000 to get this done. So I'm confident we will do it. We'll get it done. If we can't in certain sections, we've also committed to that maximum of $300,000 to do other pedestrian, vehicular, other improvements to the street. So all those dollars will go on to 19th Street.
If you can't just build a sidewalk, what alternative, I mean, how might you do something to complete the network? Will it go into the street somehow?
We'll do everything we can, working with the transportation department. It could go into the street. We could work on some sort of striped bike lane. We've got a lot of money to work with to get this done, and it's something we're willing to commit to. My hope, and we're very optimistic, that through the GIS review, we'll be able to complete the sidewalk network.
Thank you.
Further questions from council? Councilmember Ruff.
What's the price difference between, say, a unit with a bedroom that has a parking space versus one without? In other words, I guess I understand maybe that's an additional expense, but what would the difference be?
We believe the market rent for covered parking spots in the market range anywhere from $75 to $90 per month, and we've committed to selling those parking spots on an a la carte basis and not including them into the monthly rent for the units.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the public, and this is public comment on reasonable condition 1. So if you would please limit your comment to reasonable condition 1 of ordinance 1912. You'll have an opportunity to speak on the ordinance itself in a few minutes. Okay, seeing none, we're back to council for final comment on the reasonable condition. Anyone like to? Councilmember Piedmont Smith?
This is, in my experience, this developer has gone farther than any other developer to meet the requests of the council, both in starting to make this corridor on Walnut Street more pedestrian friendly by bringing the building up close to the street and having a patio area right next to the sidewalk. And also trying to add some more sustainable features to the project. They are admittedly not a big part of the project, but they do show a willingness on the part of the developer to engage with the council and the goals, sustainability goals of the community. I am most excited about the commitment to fund a Bloomington Transit bus route. We all know that Bloomington Transit is very limited in the funding for operations. We heard in the spring when they did a study to optimize their routes, which was to be a zero-sum game, because they weren't saying, we have more money, tell us how to use it. They were saying, we have the same amount of money, can we use it better? But a lot of people, got excited and said, well, we want this and this and this. And we just can't do that with the funding we have now for Bloomington Transit. So through that process, it became even more clear to me that we need other sources of funding for Bloomington Transit. And this is really a revolutionary way to fund transit, to have the developer make a commitment to pay for the route. So I think that is a wonderful aspect of the project. I guess I would have said this later, but as I'm talking, and the amendment is certainly all tied in with the proposal itself, I will just address the fact that I voted no last time. And I think that for myself, it was not that I didn't understand what was happening. I knew fully what was happening, but the final set of changes brought by the developer was presented to us the same day, September 4th. So it was, I didn't have much time to review them. Furthermore, I've had time since then to further reflect on the concessions that the developer has made. And I've continued to engage, as many of us here have, in conversations with people in core neighborhoods who don't like the idea of higher density in their neighborhoods. And, they repeatedly have voiced concerns to me and said, look, there are better places for high density. Well, this is a good place for high density. This is a well-traveled, high-traffic corridor. It is
Councilmember
not-
Piedmont-Smith, I'm
Yes?
sorry to interrupt, but we did vote on structuring the debate, and your time has expired.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
So,
forgot about that.
if you would just wrap it up in the next sentence
Yeah.
or so.
Yeah, so that's why upon further reflection and seeing that we really do need more housing, this is an appropriate place for that. And I think the conditions are more than reasonable, and I'm pleased that the developer is agreeable to it. So I will support the amendment.
Thank you, Councilmember Piedmont-Smith. Other comment? Councilmember Sims.
Thank you. I will support it as well. I know that's a big surprise since I supported it last week and I've supported it in the past. But I think the reasonable conditions and some of the concessions, and I don't want to really say concessions, some of the agreements that the company has went with us to make this work is commendable. I also think that we are in a position, City Council and administration, to demand certain things to be brought into our community and to be introduced. The worst thing that could happen is that they could say no. And I think they got close a couple times. But the worst thing they could ever say is no, and not to sound disrespectful, but if they leave, it's not going to be that much longer before someone else comes in and wanting to do the same thing that would be probably willing to do some of these things that we're asking. So I appreciate everything that you all are doing. Probably the biggest thing to me is the community benefit. student-oriented housing, we've talked about this. I pretty much guarantee you, at least I won't support any more student-oriented housing in the downtown area or overlay. And I think many of us have talked about that. So where are some of the areas where this best fits? There's gonna be few parcels that fit better than where we are now. And there's just certain things that happen. I have heard some of my colleagues, my counselors, this is going to create some other issues. And you know, I'm sorry for that, and that's not something that I want. Wish we could avoid it. But on the scale, is it better for the community or long-term that we do this? And I'm also excited about adding to the housing inventory. And that's something else we've all talked about, that as we do some of these, then we all know other projects that were built 20 years ago that will in fact turn into, and I don't want to say affordable housing, but housing that is more affordable. There's differences there. So don't confuse affordable housing with housing that's affordable. Okay, and I'm kind of interested in seeing it go that way. Yeah, we want to have a mix. I'm telling you, students and families, that's just not a good mix. And I'm telling you from experience. So I'm happy to support this. I think I got about 30 seconds before I get screamed at. No, I'm just joking. But I support this project, and thank you all for that. And thank my colleagues for suggesting some of these changes that makes it more palatable for us. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for your comments. Councilmember Sturbaum?
Yeah, this comes to council for a reason, and the reason is that we have to affirm that there is a public good in this process. And the fact that we don't just stamp it yes or no is how we can assure that there is a level of public good that allows us to approve of this project. You know, we needed a little more time to deliberate, and as it turns out, we got it. And these are very close calls. There are issues that make people think yes and no, and that's why people were sitting on the edge on a lot of this. But, you know, we've turned down, for various reasons, good and bad, 2 other projects that had 700 bedrooms each. This would have put us over 2,000 bedrooms turned down in a year. And there is a law of supply and demand for housing, and we need to get some more beds in this community. And these student beds, the Plan Commission has decided this is a well-placed project, and I've been 55, 45, and now I've gone 45, 55 in support, and it's because of these conditions of approval and the sufficient public good that we can affirm as a council. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comment?
Here.
Councilmember Granger?
Thank you. I am going to support the amendment. I do not support the whole ordinance, but I do support the amendment. And I think it explains how we operate as a city council. It is our job to pay attention to the pesky details that I've heard people talk about. This is our job. And I think that my colleagues did a good job in demanding more. And perhaps we do have a better project. And I appreciate the give and take that the developers worked on with my colleagues, and I will support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other comment, then I'll make Councilmember Volin.
Let me set the clock again. Even if IU were to build more dorms, they wouldn't necessarily add more public transit to support those new dorms. They are building 1 new dorm, which is the first net new housing in 50 years. Meanwhile, if anything, they're not increasing service on campus bus, they're cutting it. So the fact that this project is coming forward with, roughly the value of their commitment to funding a route is on the order of $130,000 a year, and that will grow with the cost of living adjustments. It's just something that we can't expect the state to do it, but a municipal corporation and private petitioners can make that sort of thing happen. But we needed to get the details right. We needed to get a measure that we could live with. And so I have, great respect for the petitioners for making that proposal and being willing to commit to it. I would also point out that while this project has a maximum of 0.556 spaces per bedroom, I love going back to the original, the OG large project that everyone disdained, Smallwood, which is 8 stories tall. It has a parking ratio of 0.3, 213 spaces, 704 beds. How does that work? It's because since day one, the number 6 and the number 9 have gone right past it. With a bus going past this project, it's going to reduce the demand for parking. Any new project that gets developed on this route, that's anything even remotely approaching the size of this project, ought to be expected to do the same thing. No more private shuttles. They're contributing to the public good, and it benefits everyone. That alone does not an approval make. I mean, I was conflicted about this, but I had to say that if I had a choice, I'd rather see such large buildings built in the city where they can be under city jurisdiction than on campus where the state can. And if you want to see what the state can and will build, they're willing to build 11-story, 14-story towers. This is the kind of project that's going up in other college towns. If you want to go to West Lafayette or Champaign or East Lansing, you're going to see 12, 14, 16, 18-story buildings. Okay, that didn't happen here off campus because we capped it. And so now we're only looking at a 5 or 6-story building. I have more to say, but I'll leave it for the final comment and everything. But this is the biggest reason why this and the parking ratio, capping the parking, were the biggest reasons why I supported this reasonable condition and what I wanted to do basically on September 4th, even though I didn't know it yet. I didn't have the ability to articulate it. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other council comments, then I'll make mine, and that is that I share the sentiments of Councilmember Granger, that I appreciate this reasonable condition that was negotiated, and I appreciate my council colleagues and the petitioner for working through better materials on the facade and off-site improvements. The sidewalks are going to be very important for connectivity. I appreciate the bus route and so forth. So this is a notable improvement. And so I will support the reasonable condition.
Mr. Chair?
Councilmember Ruff, do you have a question?
Well, no, I just decided I would like to make a comment.
Yes,
So
please.
when you're finished, I just want
I
to.
finished. Please. Yeah.
Yeah, I share Councilmember Granger and Councilmember Rallo's comments are some same as the way I feel about this. And in addition, the public benefits do result from these changes. But the only way these things can happen, funding bus routes, paying for hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of sidewalk improvements, are if they're tied to a project of this scale, which I don't think is a necessary scale to get bedrooms in this community, and in a way that's consistent with our community character and with our community members' wishes, and that's fair to fair competition for local developers who cannot begin to provide these kinds of benefits. So they're great, right? They're definitely benefits, but they're linked inextricably to this scale of a project, and I think that's where the issue is for me. So thank you for letting me jump in after you were done.
Thank you. Have we concluded council comment? Somebody would like to?
Call the question.
Second.
Questions have been called and seconded on reasonable condition 1. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Sandberg,
Yes.
Ruff,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Sturbaum,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Granger,
Yes.
Rollo,
Yes.
Volin.
Yes.
Reasonable condition 1 is adopted 8-0. Are there any other amendments? Then we will go to the ordinance as amended. Are there questions from council? Okay, seeing none, then we will go to the public for public comments on ordinance 1912 as amended by reasonable condition 1. If you'd like to speak, please step forward. No one? Okay. Then we're back to council for final comments on ordinance 1912 as amended. Anyone? Councilmember Volin, would you like to begin?
Yeah, I wanted to address a comment that the petitioner made. I don't think that anyone in this process had bad intentions. I think that the petitioner had good intentions as well, and I'm certain of their intentions. But I think everyone could see from the meeting of September 4th, it doesn't matter if everyone's well-intentioned, you could still have a train wreck of a decision or a decision made poorly. You know, I think that you know, we simply, two of us at least, and it turns out more than two of us, needed to see precise terms. We got those terms. They've been unanimously approved by members, even though not all of them agree with the project as a whole. I also think that it's not necessarily true that local developers can't do a project like this. After all, it was Jacobs who built Smallwood. I was present in the RDC meeting in late 2015 when Mr. Stolberg, Mr. Ferguson, and Mr. Lewis, local developers all came and said, if you're going to build housing on the trades district property, why don't you let us take a crack at it? I think people are capable of doing it. I'm not denying that it's easier for out-of-towners to do it. But, you know, we certainly could have our share of locally built behemoths. But I would again say that thanks to shrewd zoning, shrewd work from the Planning and Transportation Department and stewardship of the council over the past 13 years of the current UDO, we've prevented over large projects from being built. If anybody thinks that the projects we have here are large, let's take a tour of the Big Ten and let's see how big a project really can be and is. Let's go to Purdue sometime. I know we're not Purdue, but we're not that different. Come and take a look at the towers they built. So I want to thank everyone for their cooperation. This has been a very difficult and confusing process of reopening the question. Just the reopening the question took a while to do, as everyone could see tonight. Most of the meeting was spent figuring out how to do it. And as I think everyone can see that the result is a better project. Am I conflicted? Yes, I still am. I would rather not see a project this dense, purely students. I would rather not see, I'd rather see a specific formula for setting aside money in lieu of building affordable housing within the project. But for the reasons I stated earlier, on balance, I come down on the side of this project, and I'm looking forward to riding that bus and seeing a garage that is that may even be less full than the petitioners expect because of the bus. Thanks very much.
Councilmember Granger.
Thank you. I'm voting no. I think I've been saying that for weeks. But I still have something to say about this. I think Indiana University has put the city of Bloomington in a very challenging position. Very challenging. And we're forced to make these decisions that maybe some might say is best for the community, some might disagree. This particular project, although the petitioners have made quite a few conciliations, I think that it's still, I think it's just still too big, and the out-of-town aspect bothers me. I really think that I'd like to see more local. I know the owner is anxious to sell this property, so he will have a great benefit. I do believe it is valuable property for housing, just not this kind of housing. Because we need housing, But what we need is affordable housing. This project is not affordable. This project, nobody talks about the students who can't afford this project, and they are out there. A lot of students come to IU on scholarships, and they don't realize how expensive it is. And I know students live in their car. I know it, because I work at Shalom. So it frustrates me that we're building all these apartments really for rich students. And then it goes back to what I said last week. I really believe the city administration must have a plan in place for what to do with people we are displacing, who are living in affordable housing or who have no housing. It's great that we're gonna build more affordable housing, but now we're tearing down a place that's affordable, it's temporary, and we have nothing in place for this particular group of people. And it frustrates me a lot. I hear, and maybe because people know I voted no, but I have heard a lot over the past months about people who say, we don't need another project like this. It's too big, it's ugly. Well, maybe it won't be so ugly anymore, but I'm trying to listen to those people as well. And I think that I just want to remind people, to this day, I mean, I wasn't here when Smallwood was approved. People are still talking about that decision, and they just lambast city council for voting for that. So I am voting no. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We'll now go to Councilmember Sturbaum.
Yes, Councilmember Sandberg and I have worked for several years on a committee on affordable housing. And what we have concluded and what we know is that affordable housing doesn't happen without supplement. It doesn't happen without federal funds. It doesn't happen without putting together a heroic effort of funding from this piece and this piece and this piece and this piece. Because you don't make money doing affordable housing. And this method of getting the beds that we need for the upper end of the housing spectrum while also creating the beds on the lowest end of the housing spectrum is a way to create some balance. And we're not allowed to do it in a formulaic way, but we are allowed to do it in an incentive-driven way. And I just watched a project be put together at the end of my neighborhood on Walker Street, and I worked with the developer very closely because he wanted support from our neighborhood, which we gave. But I also knew how close he had lost by 3 points his federal funding the previous year. You had to put this together, have this piece of the pie, and then there's how much federal money is there. And there were 11 projects, they funded 10. He was 11. So he came back again, and a piece of that funding came from our affordable housing fund that came from a donation in kind from a development project. And those pieces, those projects depend on a margin that is very thin. And that margin that we can fill with this affordable housing fund is the difference between one of those projects happening and one of those projects not happening. You know, it's the difference between people having a bedroom, having an apartment for their children, and having a homeless shelter for their, getting them off the street and literally having their single room occupancy room. Those are gonna happen on the end of Walker Street because we could close that gap. And it's a significant contribution, it's a significant public good, and I am going to support this. And I ask my fellow council members to do the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Councilmember Piedmont Smith.
Yeah, with this PUD, if it is approved, we are going to meet several community needs. First of all, missing sidewalk along Walnut Street and 19th Street. It'll make it safer for pedestrians, not just those in this apartment building, but others as well, to walk to campus. There's going to be a bus service that will greatly benefit all residents on the north side of Bloomington, the north side of campus, not just the residents of this development. And it is a great precedent for private funds going into public transit. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, the building has been brought forward so that we can begin to reclaim North Walnut Street as a place where people might actually walk. I think that's a public benefit as well. I do want to say a few words about the Housing Development Fund. There is a perception out there, and I mentioned this the last meeting on this topic and in earlier meetings. There is a perception out there that if a developer has a lot of money and gives money to the city through the Housing Development Fund, then they can play the game. And they will get approved. I want to emphasize that this is not a political donation to anybody. It's not a slush fund for the mayor or anybody else in city government. It is a fund that is used to support affordable and workforce housing. I think part of the problem is that people do not see how this money is spent. People do not see the process by which the city decides which projects get money. And I actually am very concerned about that, and I'm going to be working on a way to make that process more transparent so that those decisions are made in a public meeting, either by the city council or by some other committee with representation of council members. I think that's very important. It's very hurtful for the city to have that perception out there that there's money just going into somebody's pocket, because that is not what is happening. But I have totally set that money aside, and that is not factoring into my decision at all. It's rather the things that I've mentioned that are a true community benefit that lead me to support this project. And the kind of tipping point, and the reason I've changed my mind from September 4th, is that this adds a significant number of units of housing, which is what we need. We have not enough supply, and as my colleague, Councilmember Sturbaum said, even if it's on the high end, it'll have a filtering effect so that there will be more affordable, maybe not legally affordable, but more affordable units on the other hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Further council comments? Councilmember Ruff.
You know, this is another case where the arguments on both sides, I think, are really legitimate. They're strong. This is close, as Councilmember Sturbaum said. He was 55, 45, now he's 45, 55. There are clearly a lot of valid arguments about this being a good place for this kind of project. One, I think, could just easily argue it's not a good place for this kind of project. I mean, something like this is only going to, the only thing that's going to develop around it is more stuff like this and other student-serving businesses that will specifically target this this demographic, this crowd. And this is on a gateway leading into our community across from Military Arts Park. So, we can argue both sides, almost every aspect. This idea that building more and more can create affordability, there's questions about that, whether that's really valid. I mean, your fastest growing communities are not most affordable communities by any stretch. They're some of the most expensive communities. It's complicated. It's extremely unfortunate that this is one of the better ways we have to get affordable housing fund money, or money to help with affordable housing. I mean, I can't really think of a good example. The best example I can think of for comparison right now, public broadcasting, the way it's currently set up in this country, needs private corporate funding to support it. But it doesn't come without significant consequences most of which I think are undesirable and undermine the very purpose and validity and service of public broadcasting. So, I just, given all of the arguments and counter-arguments and uncertainties, I just have to fall back on what I really feel like my constituents, the significant part of the community, maybe probably the majority of the community, feels about this type of project. And I don't think it's the only way, the only scale we can develop at in this community to provide what we need. So I'm going to be voting no.
Thank you for your comment. Other comment? Okay, I'll just conclude by my comments, and I'll pick up where Councilmember Ruff left off, which is that my sense is that constituents of District 4 feel that the pendulum has swung too far in terms of building large-scale monolithic student housing. And especially not knowing the occupancy rate of the existing structures. I think that Councilmember Ruff stated it well. What will develop around this development? Everything ancillary to that single demographic. That's what will follow, despite the fact that the comprehensive plan specifies Gateway North focus area to have a diversification of housing types. It includes student housing, but I think this precludes multifamily residential and other diverse commercial uses. It is our gateway to the community. So this will be a significant part of our gateway. I'm tired of large-scale single occupancy developments. I think that the longevity of these structures is probably not very long. I think it will, I've been challenged that this should be considered sustainable because it is high in density. But I think that it will likely end up in the landfill as Dunhill did in a few decades from now. So I do appreciate the many attributes of this that the petitioner has offered, that council and the Plan Commission and Planning and Transportation have worked on. I think those are significant, and I recognize those. But it's just not enough for me to support it. The last thing I want to say is that in bringing this back, as a council member, I might have voted against suspending the rules. As council president, I detected that there was support for this, and so I wanted to work with the wish of the majority of the council, and so vote to suspend the rules so this could be heard again. And that concludes my comment. If there's no other comment, then we can call the question.
Mr. Sims has a comment.
Councilmember Sims.
Just simply want to say one thing, and I know the council president, this was a tough decision for him to act, to call this back, or to support calling it back. And he talked to everyone up here, but being the president, that supersedes maybe some of his own personal leanings in order to do what's best for his colleagues, and I do appreciate that. And with that, I call the question.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. The question's been called and seconded on ordinance, pardon me,
1912 is amended.
1912 is amended. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Ruff,
No.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Sturbaum,
Yes.
Sims,
Yes.
Granger,
No?
Rallo,
No.
Volin,
Yes.
Sandberg.
Yes.
Ordinance 1912 is adopted, or is amended, is adopted 5-3.
Do we have any other business?
We have council schedule.
No, just a reminder that even tonight, there's a UDO special session in going on in the council chambers. There'll be another meeting of that sort tomorrow night, and then you have a meeting on Wednesday night. And the following Wednesday, you will introduce and discuss the budget for next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.